urgency important? What is sort of the natural state of things that you will encounter in an organization?
So, Professor, people would initially resist the change.
Okay,
And if you do not put urgency into their mindset, what they feel is that it's not required to act upon it.
okay,
And
good.
do not go through the process of the change. And that doesn't occur usually.
Okay, exactly, right? So there's this natural human resistance to change. And what is another word for that we talk about? When we're trying to increase urgency, that means we're trying to decrease what? Which is basically how we sort of summarize this resistance to change that humans are naturally prone to. What's that word? Complacency, right? People are complacent, right? People in organizations are complacent. That's sort of the natural state of affairs. The status quo is complacency. And so we're trying to shift our mindsets to break out of complacency. And the way to do that, the very first thing you have to do is increase that sense of urgency, because by doing that, that will decrease complacency, okay? Now let's just take a quick look at this example, right? We've got an interview here with a very capable executive who was struggling in his transformation effort, or in their transformation effort. And I want you to try to identify, just based on what we've talked about so far, why you think, based on this conversation, so you'll see the answers the CEO gave in response to a number of questions. So just based on his answers, can you tell why there were problems in the change effort? That's what I want you to identify right now. Okay, just based on what we've talked about so far. Okay, question. Do your people believe the status quo is unacceptable? Do they really feel a sense of urgency? Answer, some do, but many probably do not. Question, who is pushing for this change? Answer, I suppose it's mostly me. Question, do you have a compelling vision of the future and strategies for getting there that help explain why this reorganization is necessary? Answer, I think so, although I'm not sure how clear it is. Question, have you ever tried to write down the vision and strategies in summary form on a few pages of paper? Answer, not really. Do your managers understand and believe in that vision? I think the 3 or 4 key players are on board, but I wouldn't be surprised if many others either don't understand or don't believe in it, okay? So based on that conversation, why do you think this executive ran into issues and resistance when trying to implement change? Can you spot anything based on this discussion that you might want to highlight? Yes, what's your name? You know, I'm going to ask before I continue. I actually meant to make an announcement. Sorry, I forgot to do that. If you can you bring cards and write your names, or would it be easier if I brought the name cards? I would just bring the paper and the marker and I'd ask you to write your name.
We have one.
Do you have that? I thought you might. Okay, can you bring them to class, because participation is obviously such a big component, and it'll just help me more quickly get familiar. Perfect, thank you. Okay, yeah, sorry, can you continue? Okay, so I think so, although I'm not sure how clear it is. So if you yourself don't understand your vision, or are not confident that other people understand it, you've got a problem, right? And they probably don't. Okay, good. Anything else that kind of gives you an indication of why this person is having a hard time? Yeah.
Lack of urgency in the other person.
Doesn't seem like there's any urgency, right? Even just by the responses. What else, particularly about this answer? What do people believe the status quo? And so do they really feel a sense of urgency, right? So not only, are you saying there's no urgency in the organization or on him?
And to the person he's talking with.
Okay, yes, that's true, but also, what about based on this answer? Yeah.
Professor, what I believe is that people in the organization are not ready to accept the changes.
Yes.
They are resisting it. So that's why some might be accepting the change, but many are not.
But his response, his attitude about it suggests, as you're saying, is that he's not urgent himself, which is obviously a problem, because remember, it's about leading by example. If you don't believe in something yourself, you're going to have a very hard time convincing anybody else to follow, right? To follow your lead. Anything else based on the conversation? Yes?
I don't think he knows himself. I don't think he's having conversations with his people to know where their mind is at with respect to their vision, right?
Okay, that's
What
true.
he doesn't know himself to communicate to them saying this is what we're looking at, X, Y, Z.
So there's,
obviously he can't post it.
right, there's a little bit of shiftiness in his responses, right? He's not really certain, so there's a lack of probably self-awareness, probably lack of confidence there, okay? Yes?
I think a lot of it is assumption based.
Assumptions,
Yeah.
right? So, not really, right? I think that 3 or 4 key players are on board, asking questions about who's pushing. I suppose it's mostly me, right? Okay, good. Many probably do not. So again, really doesn't know what's going on around him. Anyone else? Yes.
Yes, I can see the hesitation in his answer, and he's not sure at all.
Okay, yep, exactly. Right? What about the other thing we talked about, common mistake and change efforts? What about this question? Who is pushing for the change? I suppose it's mostly me. What's the problem there? What is that telling us? What's missing? Oh, yes.
So for example, in this situation, like what I feel is that nowadays automation is in, like it's rising slowly. So I'm just, implementing that automation in this conversation. It's like for the company, it is really very necessary to, cut the cost and all. But the employees and all, they are actually, they're resisting. They don't want this change. And maybe that's the reason for the answer. I suppose it's mostly me. It's just for the company and not for only the employees.
What's the problem though? What's the problem based on a common mistake in change efforts specifically that we talked about last class? Yes, behind.
I think the company isn't following teamwork. So he's
So there's what? What do we need in a change effort? You're on the right track. Yes?
Urgency is missing, there's no urgency, there's no atmosphere or environment for the team to push for that.
Okay, but there's no what though?
Failing to
There's
create
no
a
back.
powerful coalition.
Okay, right? So there's no team. You need a strong team, and by saying he's the only one pushing for the change, right there's an indication that there is no strong team, right? And that is obviously a common mistake and a pitfall. So that's something you need to voice, because one single person can never lead a major change effort on their own. It's not going to happen. You need a strong team with the right composition, which we'll talk about next class. Okay, great. So that was great. So here are some indications, right? Let's take a look at some of the issues. So answer here, problematic. We've kind of touched on all these, right? Everything you've said was great. Summarize the problem. Let's move on. Okay, so now I'm going to highlight this important distinction that I keep talking about, right? Do you all know the difference between management and leadership? Have you learned about it maybe in another course? Do you think it's the same thing? People often conflate it. I mean, it's not, a lot of scholars still use the words interchangeably, which they're not, right? Even in everyday society, how many times do we see people referring to other people as a leader? So, this person runs the country, he's a leader, he should, it's just automatic in the language. That person's a CEO, so when you're referring to that person, the leader of the company. But the reason so many of us attach the word leader is because we've been conditioned, right, to associate position with the word leader, okay? And what I'm trying to encourage you all to do is try to sort of think about it differently, because technically that's actually not correct, right? Because if you understand what leadership actually means, it has nothing to do with position or status. So just because somebody is in a position of influence, it doesn't mean they're a leader. So just to call that person a leader because they're in that position is an error, okay? I know we do it in everyday language, but it's problematic because it creates confusion and it perpetuates this lack of understanding about what leadership actually is. And if we don't come to understand what leadership is, we are not going to train people properly to be leaders. Okay, so it's really important to start distinguishing between the two. And if we're trying to train people to be leaders, then we need to highlight the things that make people successful leaders. And those things are very different than what makes somebody a successful manager, okay? And so it starts with sort of understanding and creating a more accurate perception, right? So dealing with the perception that's sort of been out there. So why is this distinction so important here? Because in a change effort, it takes 70 to 90% leadership and 10 to 30% management, okay? So you still need both, and we'll talk about where management becomes important and helpful and essential, but you need more leadership. Without leadership, you are not going to have a change effort. It's not going to happen. Okay. So I want you to I'm going to highlight now, what this difference really is. But first, I want you to just answer this question here. So I want you to think about a person or a team for whom you work. So think about somebody that you've worked with in your past or currently that particularly stands out to you. okay? They are sort of someone that you would say is really exemplary in your mind, exceptional, okay? This person is just so unique, they're so special, they have really touched me, they've influenced me, you know, whatever sort of connection you have in that way. And I want you to just think about key words or points that in your mind, in your experience, made that individual so exceptional to you, okay? So just take a few seconds to think about it. You can write points down, or if you know, you can just, you know, keep in your head. Does anyone want to share what you've come up with? What do you think? Does anyone want to share your answer? What is something, yes,
So Professor, the person whom I worked with in my previous organization, the person was a go-getter and a mentor to me because he was always there to guide me through. At the same time, was a team-spirited nature. So whenever we were facing any problems, he was not putting us like, okay, it's your fault, you do it by yourself. No, he was more okay, it's our problem, let's solve it together.
okay, so from that I get others focus and, you know, mentor, someone that provided guidance, good.
I reflect back on when I worked in recruitment earlier, right? So when we were moving, like we were automating, we were moving from taking approvals offline via email for compensation, etc., to moving it on the tool, right? So that as a recruiter, obviously it's a challenge. I mean, you don't want to do that. You have to wait, go on the tool. It's a process, explaining to everybody, right? What stood out for me in terms of how my manager or our leadership handled it is they were willing to lead by example. They didn't hesitate to get on the tool themselves and approve it, rather than saying, oh, it takes me, 10 minutes to go on the tool. Let me just write approved on email, 1 second, it's done, right? So willing to lead by example, get their own hands dirty and show that, hey, this is what we expect from you, but we'll do it too. We're not just throwing it on you.
Leading by example, great, yes?
Person that comes to mind was my former boss. He was not the most compassionate, but he was a great negotiator. and
Sorry, he was,
A great negotiator, like he almost always gets things done.
okay,
And then he was always calm in the face of chaos.
okay.
Yeah.
So calming, okay, interesting. I noticed you said he wasn't very compassionate.
Yeah.
Do you think that was a problem for this
Yeah,
individual?
I didn't see how it was a problem.
Okay, and that will connect back to leadership in a moment. Yes, just give me keywords, okay? So the keywords, just to save time, because we've got a lot to get through, but just tell me the words. Yes,
So this guy, he doesn't in charge of like executive daily routines, but he decides the direction of the whole company development.
okay. So what is it about that person that stood out?
He's like the CEO, but I think he's a leader.
But what is it about him so if that's someone that you see as special, why? What is it about what they did?
Because when we encounter some like difficulties of the company development, he's always the one like to decide the direction.
So, okay, so he was the one that kept things moving forward?
Yeah.
Okay.
About the promising future.
Oh, you mean to be, he sort of actually moved things, like got things done, in
Yeah.
other words, okay?
My boss was quite proactive and he had a vision. He had a style of doing everything in different way.
Okay.
And he had solutions to all the problems.
Okay.
That is going to come in the future.
Okay, so
That's
vision
very
is
nice.
kind of like a visionary, yep,
Yes, same as my boss, he was proactive and has good personal relationship as well.
okay, good, yes,
My former boss made me feel valued. It gave room for my innovation and creativity.
okay, good, feeling valued, yes,
Open communication and there is no hesitation to ever reach out.
okay, good, so being approachable, yep,
And I'm also supportive, like
Supportive.
support and guidance to my team.
okay, good, yes,
Like a friend of mine,
yeah, Moses, yeah,
like a friend of mine, we came together at the workplace within 1 month, like we know most of the work than most of the previous staff. So it was very, his skills were very can solve problems
okay,
and was able to solve problems, any
problem
problems.
solving, yep,
Yeah,
yep,
problem solving skills.
okay,
He was
good,
very intelligent and
sure,
so
yes,
you know the work more than the previous employees.
okay, okay, cool. Is it Samuel?
Samuel, yeah. So my boss was very composed. He was very open-minded regarding new
Open-minded.
suggestions, and he provided very efficient, task-focused feedback.
Okay, okay, good. So a lot of what you said, some of there I heard a little bit more management ability, but a lot of what you said goes to the heart of what leadership is about, right? And so I mean, I really want to encourage you all, and this may have not been, I know training or the way managers and leaders are viewed across the globe is going to be different, okay? But I really want to encourage you all, if you haven't encountered something like this or a style like this, I want to really open your eyes to the importance of having an emotional intelligence, okay? And with that comes compassion, it comes being supportive, it comes knowing when to connect with people on a more intimate level than just, being able to get work done. Yes, it's important to be efficient and to get work done and to, to maintain processes and problem solve. That's all important. That's more of a management thing. A leadership thing is what something is, it makes someone so unique in terms of their character, like who they are as a person, right? Your ability to problem solve is an important skill, but it's not really about who you are as a person, right? At your core, it's a skill that you have. But we're talking more character traits. Those are the traits truly of successful leaders. Without those traits, you will never succeed as a leader, okay? And so yes, you do need competence, you need to problem solve. Those are important. But without, if it's compromising on the emotional intelligence, on the integrity, the character, the self-awareness, right? Because all of those words are things that go to the heart of what makes someone a true leader. If those things are compromised, you will never have a real leader. You can call them what you want, but you will not have a real leader. Okay? Because there is something essential. If we understand what leadership really is, it's about influencing others towards something positive, towards good. Okay? It's not about inducing fear in people to follow. That never produces lasting change. It might give you a short-term solution. It will not give you lasting change. If you want sustainable, lasting change, somebody truly has to be inspired to create that change or to work towards that change. Okay? And the only real way to inspire and to influence people is to what? What type of relationship has to be there? Obviously an authentic one, right? You have to connect to somebody emotionally, right? Which is sort of it sets the groundwork for what? What's a really important feature that should be in any successful relationship, any at all? Trust, right? And when in looking at the research, right? Remember I had gone through a number of studies when it comes to leadership and what people in organizations look for and want when they are sort of dealing with different leaders. Trust is one of the most important or the most commonly identified trait in what people are looking for in their leaders, right? Trust sets the foundation for you to really invest in a relationship and believe what somebody is telling you and act in a way that reflects your belief in what that person is telling you. And especially when we're dealing with change, right? Undergo the sacrifices and deal with the uncertainty and all the pain that we talked about that comes with change. You really have to trust somebody to be able to take sort of that risk in coming out of your own complacency, right? But if those character traits are not really in that person, how do you really trust them, right? So there are prerequisites to developing that trust, which is necessary to really bringing about the influence you need to bring out in somebody, okay? And sometimes all of that gets masked with, oh, people are doing what I'm telling them, and it's sort of this culture of creating fear, of coercion, and so it looks like, oh, that strategy is working, right, because people are doing it. But if people are doing something based on fear, it's not authentic, and if it's not authentic, it doesn't last, okay? So when we're talking about what matters, we're talking about sustainable change. Otherwise, what's the point, right? And anything that's done through coercion and fear is just, it's not true, it's not real, so it doesn't last, okay? Just remember that. Okay, so what is management? Processes that keep a complicated system of people and technology running smoothly. That's what management is, right? It's planning your budgeting, staffing, controlling, problem solving. It focuses on producing predictability and order. This is more closely tied to a role, right? So when you think about somebody in a manager position, you're identifying them correctly. That is a manager, they're in a manager position. But to just say that that person is a leader without knowing anything more, to use the word leader because they're in a management position is where it's wrong. Okay, because they might not actually be a leader. They're a manager because they're in a manager's position, and by virtue of being in that position, they're carrying out the roles of management. But are they a leader? Well, leadership is something very specific. They're not necessarily, not every manager is a leader, right? And not every leader is gonna have good management skills. Okay, there are different things. Okay. And so managers are really concerned with managing things, okay? But when we're talking about people, we don't manage people, we lead people. We manage things, we lead people. People can't be managed. I know that doesn't probably make a lot of sense because you're used to understanding management as, you know, we manage people, that's what we're doing. You're actually not. People need to be led, okay? And that's where leadership really comes in because it takes real leadership to connect with people in a way that's authentic and sustainable. Okay, because we're humans. And everything we talked about is coming back to this idea that we are actually humans at the end of the day. And humans, in order to bring out the best in humans, they need to be treated like humans, right? Even the word human resources is problematic, right? There are a lot of management terms that are still associating people with things. And we need to start understanding people separate and apart from things. People are humans, things are things. Okay? And by conflating the two, we're causing a lot of sort of mistreatment, like perceptions that, in my opinion, perpetuate this idea that it's okay to treat people like things. Okay? Which is why you get so many problems in organizations where people don't feel valued. People are exploited, which happens every day. Remember, I'm a lawyer. I've seen exploitation at its core. I've seen what employers do to employees. I've seen it all. Okay? I've seen what insurance companies do to their insured. And part of the problem is, you know, this like treatment of people as things. And so we need to really start understanding and promoting, you know, this idea of people as humans and not as things. Okay? And I'm not saying, you know, this conflating of the terms is leading to the mistreatment. Obviously, there's other reasons for the mistreatment, but I'm just saying it's really important to start associating terms properly and not sort of attaching terms that signify or that sort of associate people as a commodity, right? That's sort of a very like, it's like the start of there's way more things to deal with, but that's sort of a start. You know, I think, in my opinion, a major, I guess, it's a part of the problem. Just look at that, okay? And so, again, management, dealing with things, when we're talking about people, we're getting into the subject of leadership, okay? So what is leadership? Well, it's not really just one thing. If you look at the scholarship, like who's really defining leadership, right? Many scholars actually have different definitions of what leadership actually is. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you one definition that's like the, you know, the by the book, the sort of the be all end all definition, because it would be subjective. It would be my, you know, what I think is the more superior out of multiple scholars' opinions. But what I can tell you is that we can sort of pinpoint some common elements to leadership. So all definitions of leadership will agree, right, that there are common elements. Things like some sort of social influence, right? So leadership at its core is about influencing others. Okay, we know that. So, and again, influencing others with a positive connotation. So it's towards something positive, right? About maximizing the effort of others, right? That kind of comes in hand with leadership, with influence, right? You are trying to bring out the best in others, okay? The best in others. The best in others, you know, implies the authenticity in others, right? And that's why with coercion, you don't get authenticity out of people. You get people acting out of fear, right? Which could mean a whole bunch of things. And so if you try to coerce or, you know, lead through coercion, you're not bringing out the best in others, right? That's not leadership. That's not what it's about. You're bringing out a fabricated version of somebody based on fear. And that's not what you want. Like I said, it's not sustainable. Okay. So, and then a shared goal. Okay. So typically when we're talking about leadership, there's like this idea of we want all, like it's a shared, it's a team, collaborative type of goal or an effort working towards that shared goal. So fundamentally though, leadership should be understood as an everyday way of thinking and acting, which tells us that leadership is really about who we are, right? If it's about how we think and how we act every single day, is that not really about who we are? And then ultimately how we impact others, because it's about influence, right? And why are we all here if we don't have some concern for the world around us, right? My opinion. But I think that's sort of what it means to lead with purpose, right? Leaders are others focused. They are able to subordinate immediate self-interests for the sake of the whole, okay? Those are leaders. They are not individualistic thinking. They are not sort of self-absorbed, right? They are about the team. They are about others. That's how you maximize the effort of others. That's how you lead or contribute to real change, because no change happens with one person. True change happens with many people on board, and leadership is about bringing out the best of everybody, right, towards the shared goal. Okay, and so your ability to do that successfully is going to depend on how you think and how you act, right? It's going to depend on who you are. And so what does that actually mean? Right, so these are the key attributes of successful leadership. Self-awareness is number one. So I would say, you know, based on my own experience, based on my research, my review of the literature, self-awareness is probably number one. Authenticity is obviously equally important, but if you are not self-aware, you don't know who you are, how can you ever really be authentic? So self-awareness logically would come before authenticity, right? If you're not self-aware, you can't really live authentically. So self-awareness is number one. You have to know yourself. You have to be connected to yourself. You have to be aware of, how others perceive you, right? How you perceive yourself, how your behaviors are sort of connected to your intentions, all of that. Self-awareness, really knowing yourself. And there's external and internal self-awareness, right? We're not going to get into all of that, but really important. Authenticity, living true to who you are, being authentic, right? Integrity, optimism, subordinating self-interest for others, having solid interpersonal skills, open-minded, inclusive, listening, right? And the courage to admit mistakes. So these are some of the key, I just pulled, there's others, right? But these are some of the most important key attributes of successful leadership. But look at the first three. Those are all going to the heart of who someone is in their character, right? And that's why, when I said last class, how do you become a successful leader? Well, the very most fundamental thing that should be done is your commitment to your own self-discovery, that personal undertaking and self-discovery. Because without that, and this is a lifelong journey, by the way, right? It's something we have to be intentional about. Being authentic is something we have to be intentional about every single day, because the external pressures around us are too strong. And people are, susceptible to mistakes. People are susceptible to outside pressures and opinions and forces and all of that. And that leads to natural regression over time, right? Because we're human. So it's the ongoing intentional effort of being authentic that's needed. It's a lifelong journey. Leadership is a lifelong journey. If you've ever heard that quote, it's on the wall here somewhere downstairs on the hallway over there. That quote, that's because that's what it is. It takes a lifelong commitment to personal and self-discovery, and to constantly coming back to your core, despite the external pressures around you, coming back to, okay, who am I? Working from that, from your intrinsic values, passions, beliefs, value, all of that, right? So again, you've got to come back, center yourself, and connect with yourself, and that's an ongoing process. Because that's what it takes to develop these skills that ultimately make you a successful leader, okay? And that's why I'm talking about it. Okay, are we clear on that? So this chart highlights again, in the context, more particularly in the context of a change effort, this distinction between management and leadership, right? So you're planning, you're budgeting, you're organizing, staffing, controlling, problem solving, right? These are the things that are involved with management. It produces a degree of predictability and order. It has the potential to produce the short-term wins that you'll need in a successful change effort, and we'll talk more about that later. And then leadership is what establishes the direction, right? It's what aligns people with that direction, with that vision, and then ultimately motivates. It energizes people to want to overcome all of the barriers to change, both the personal barriers that they will encounter and the barriers within the organization that they will encounter, right? Leaders will motivate and inspire people to want to, not to feel forced, right? So leadership is about pulling as opposed to pushing, right? Managers sometimes, when you're overmanaged, it's about pushing people, like forcing. That's not successful, right? And inspiring. Inspiring takes people, you have to sort of get people to intrinsically want to be a part of the change and to take the action to change, okay? And that takes leadership. You can never get there through forcing somebody or through coercion, okay? So leadership then is what produces change, okay? And often to a dramatic degree, it has the potential to produce extremely useful change, of course, and that can be in many different contexts. Okay, so just to summarize, we know management is still important, but only leadership can break through the rigidity of, status quo, of tradition, the forces of complacency, all of that. Only leadership can break through that. It can motivate the actions that you need to alter behavior in a significant way, and then ultimately to get the change to stick by anchoring it in the corporate culture. Okay, only leadership can do that. Firms that don't have leadership are going to struggle, probably fail to transform the organization. When you've got overmanaged and underled, that's where you get that pushing and pulling, right, that I talked about, and you need pulling to sustain it. Because if somebody doesn't inherently want something, because of how difficult change is and how painful change is, if you don't really want it, it will not last. If you are not doing it because you intrinsically want it so bad, it will not last. And unfortunately, that is why most people in their lives change very little. Okay, I'm being real with you here. Most people in their lives will change very little. It takes a massive desire to want more. And that's the starting point. Then you've got to put in the work. Okay? And so we're applying this to an organizational context here. And so you're trying to get change on a much higher, some more substantial level. Okay. Transformations obviously require sacrifice, dedication, and creativity, and you can't get that with coercion. You can't get that with pushing. Like I said, you need to pull it out of people, meaning they have to want it. They have to want to be a part of it. And that's what inspiration is all about. It's making people want something, right? Okay. Okay, any questions on that? Now I'm going to jump into our first stage of our 8-stage process. Okay? All right, step 1, establishing urgency. Okay, we already kind of talked about why this is important. We need to get people's support. If people, and what is urgency about again? We're getting people to see what?
To get involved.
Pardon?
To get involved in the procedure.
That's part of it, but even before that, what are we getting people to say? If people are complacent, that means they're, oh, we don't need to change, but everything's fine. Everything's fine, I'm satisfied. That's complacency, self-satisfaction, right? So what is urgency trying to do?
Need for change. They see the need for change.
Yeah, exactly, right? Urgency is trying to get people to see, oh, wait a minute, we do need to change. Because that's your starting point. If you can't get there, forget about the rest, right? So that's why step 1 is establishing urgency. It's meant to reduce complacency. When people start to, at the very least, see the need for change, you'll start to reduce complacency. And the more urgent people will feel, the less complacent they will be, because they'll sort of have that, again, that urgency, we have to do something about this. This is unacceptable. We need to sort of, we're gonna survive, if we're gonna keep up, we need to change. We need that, feeling in people, okay? And so this will allow for the coming together of people with enough power and influence to start to move the change process along. When people are feeling urgent, they're going to want to be on board, they're going to want to be on your coalition, they're going to be, ready to move things forward, okay? Without urgency, and like I said before, just naturally, it's human sort of natural response whenever you sort of introduce the idea of change to them. They will find a million different reasons to not cooperate or to sort of tell you why it's not necessary, right? If they really believe that change is not necessary, they're gonna come up with every reason in the world to not commit and to not be supported because they don't believe it's necessary. Okay? So part of the leader's job and at the stage is to create that urgency to show why it's necessary, so they don't try to create all of these reasons. They have to believe it's needed. Okay, if they can't believe it, it's not going to happen. What does complacency actually look like? Okay, so in an organization, right, complacency, again, we're satisfied, things are fine, we don't need to change. That's the attitude. So what might make you think what might make you feel that way in an organization? Well, just look around, right? If sort of nobody's recognizing a need for change or underestimating that change is important. If problems are happening, but they're not addressed. So swept under the rug, right? If you've got a problem in a relationship, right, just like any relationship, and you don't address it, you just let it sweep under the rug, that creates an attitude of complacency. Over time, what happens? Things sort of crash and burn because you haven't addressed the problem, right? Same idea here, okay? If you're not addressing problems, if they're getting ignored, you're creating a culture of complacency that is very dangerous, okay? Happy talk. talk is not necessarily a bad thing. But when you're just so concerned with talking about, it's like forced positivity. Have you ever heard of the concept of forced positivity? It's trying to force the idea that everything is okay when things are not okay. It is actually healthy. Not only is it okay, it is healthy to admit when things aren't okay. You have to come to terms with truth. It's not about being negative. It's not about being a pessimist. It's about coming to terms with truth. Okay? And then having the optimism to know that you can get out of that, things can get better. That's where you want the positivity. You want the optimism to know things get better and things can get better. They are within your control to an extent, right? Not everything is within your control, but how you react to things is in your control, okay? So you can be positive in that sense. But to ignore problems, to not see the truth, is where you're in danger, right? Is where you're in trouble. So when you have an organization that has a culture of this, it's a sign that you're in trouble. If you've got leaders or your management team who every time you've got maybe others in your organization trying to bring things to their attention, hey, this is a problem, and they don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. There it is. It's the natural resistance to change. It's the sort of the reluctance to wake up and see the reality because you don't want to deal with the problem. You don't want to face it. That is a sign of complacency. Classic sign of complacency, right? You're stifling or ignoring bad news. You don't want to hear it. You actually punish the people who are bringing you bad news, right? Or you resent the people who are bringing you bad news because you don't want to face the truth because you don't want to deal with it. That's a complacent person. That's a complacent mindset, okay? And then stifling new ideas. Okay, so why might this exist in an organization? So these examples, this is what it looks like. Why might complacency exist? Meaning, what are some of the sources of complacency in an organization? Yes?
I think complacency might be a result of groupthink. So when people in an organization are kind of, the culture in the organization is kind of one where, everyone thinks the same way. Nobody wants to be different or say something different.
Okay, good.
That sort of environment, complacency.
Yep, that can cause, Anything else? So I'm asking specific on sources. So what is causing these issues, right? So when you ignore key problems, right? So too many visible resources. Why might that cause complacency? Why might too many visible resources cause complacency? The source. Think about it. What is complacency? We're trying to change. You have a complacent attitude. How does having too many visible resources pose a
I think
problem?
in an organization, it forces it influences the employees into like a false sense of positivity that maybe things are not as
bad. What
bad.
kind of message are you sending by having all these resources? You have corporate jets lying around. You just looks like there's abundance. What message is that sending?
Everything is fine.
Yeah.
It's going.
Why do we need to change?
We don't need to change.
We're doing well. We're so profitable. We've got all of these resources. That reinforces in people's minds there's no need to change.
Yeah.
And when you're dealing with the natural human reluctance already ingrained in everybody, right, to change, that reluctance to change, and then you're adding reasons for them to sort of conform to their own predetermined belief that change isn't necessary, right? You're just contributing to the problem and you're making it that much harder to pull people out of that complacency, okay? Low performance standards, again, if performance standards are too low, people aren't necessarily going to see, if sort of you're not requiring people to step up to another level, right? People are going to think, well, what is the need to change? What's the problem? Everything's fine as is, right? You don't need to do more. Okay, so all of these wrong performance indicators, not having enough feedback. Okay, when you are not actually getting feedback, so if you're not getting feedback from your customers, how can that contribute to complacency? Or maybe you're afraid to get feedback from your customers. You don't ask, you don't want to know. But how can that lead to complacency?
So when you're not getting the feedback, you feel everything is okay from your side. You're doing
No bad reviews, right? No bad reviews. We don't want to hear bad reviews because that means something's wrong. And if we have to come to terms with something being wrong, then we have to do something
Do
about
something
it.
about
And
it,
people don't want to do anything about anything, right? Because they're complacent. They want to know that the way they're doing things is fine. They want to do that they want to know that they can keep doing what they've been doing their whole life, or whatever it is, for how many years, and they don't have to change. That's a very dangerous mindset, right? Because the reality is we do have to change, okay? That's the world we live in. Kill the messenger of badness culture, same idea, human tendency towards denial, and too much happy talk. So all of these things will cause complacency in an organization. Oh, what did I do? Okay. Now, people will often underestimate just how, and that's why I keep repeating myself, right? Because people will always underestimate how powerful and how subtle forces of tradition, status quo, and complacency really are, okay? They will always be there trying to convince us. Remember how I said first class that a lot of what we believe isn't true? This is part of it, right? Status quo, tradition, complacency, they are such powerful forces that they will convince us to actually believe everything is fine and that we don't need to change, even though we do. Even though the truth is that everything is not fine and we do need to change if we want more for ourselves, right? If we want to get to a better place, okay? But we have to, and because those forces are so powerful, we have to be aware of that. We have to never, and that's the rule of thumb here, never underestimate the magnitude of the forces that will always be there to reinforce complacency and that help maintain the status quo, okay? First step is understanding how powerful they are so that you can become more self-aware, right? Not only for others, but for yourself. So crisis is really important. In the other slide, it said a source of complacency is no obvious crisis, okay? Well, when you have a crisis, that will help push urgency, right? Usually, you know, when people, even on an individual level, and a lot of what I say in an organizational context, I will relate to our individual lives because it's the same thing. At its core, we're talking about the same stuff, okay? It's just applied in different contexts. So when I said earlier, people change very little. What really, you know, and unfortunately, but that's because those forces of tradition, complacency are so powerful, right? What usually takes, not usually, I guess I'll say it, I won't, you know, what happened, what it does usually take. So what it typically will take to break people from these mindsets and to sort of help people sort of see the need for change despite the strong forces of complacency is some kind of crisis. Even on an individual level, right? I don't know if anybody has ever gone through something traumatic in their personal lives. I have, something that was traumatic for you. And it will force you to look at the way that you have seen everything in your life. Okay, I've gone through it and I've had to challenge everything that I believe to really understand who I am and what I want and what, you know, and what I, you know, what sort of was behind my ways of thinking or my beliefs. And you start to really, you know, sort of come to an awakening. It's no different in this context, okay? So when there's no obvious crisis, people will be complacent because there's no reason to think change needs to happen. Why do I need to change the way I see things or the way that I make decisions or the way, whatever? Why do I need to do that if everything is fine around me, okay? But when you have a crisis, it helps in that it sort of, you know, gives that sort of sense of urgency a boost, okay? Now, so that's why crisis can be really important. However, you don't need a crisis to have a transformation, to have a successful transformation. What you do is you can force a crisis. You can fabricate a crisis in order to help push people, pull people, I should say, out of complacency, okay? So what does that look like? You intend to allow a loss, right? If it's gonna take a lot, like if things are sort of looking to sort of positive to financially healthy, you can allow a loss. You can allow errors to blow up a little bit. I'm not saying anything substantial, right? Or something that you can't sort of get on top of. But sometimes you can employ these strategies to help increase urgency, okay? You can bombard employees with information about problems, so get rid of the happy talk. Start looking like there really is a crisis, so make a crisis, or make people aware of a problem, as opposed to just allowing people to think everything's fine, because it's not fine. And if you think that way, you will have a hard time adapting when a real crisis inevitably happens, because we live in a changing environment, right? Okay. remove signs of excess, all of that. So the role of middle and lower level managers. Now, typically your senior executives are the key players, right, to really get rid of the rigidness of corporate culture. But sometimes they're not initiating change, right? Sometimes the executives need others, maybe middle level, lower level managers to step up and really try and encourage and initiate that change and help get the senior players on board. So it's always an opportunity for these individuals to be part of the transformation and the challenge. Okay, so let's go to our first exercise here. What I want you to do is, going back to sources of complacency, okay, I want you to take a look at these sources. Just select 2 or 3 of them, okay? I'm gonna have you get into teams, and I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a leadership team attempting to lead change in an organization. Your first step is to increase urgency, okay? Meaning that you have to reduce complacency, okay? So I mentioned a number of sources of complacency in that slide, in slide 18. So I want you as a team to think about what would you do in an organization. Okay, so what types of changes you would make? Just, it's very kind of high level, right? So you don't have a lot of specifics in the example. But I want you to think about what are some of the things you would do to address the behaviors leading to complacency. So you've got some of these issues going on. They're causing complacency. Choose 2 or 3 of them and suggest things that you might do as a team to address them. Okay? So why don't you get together for the next 20 minutes as a team, think about this, and we'll take them up at the start of next class. Okay, that will give you some time to actually work on it, and then we'll talk about it together at the start of next class. Any questions on anything that I've said, or anything about this exercise, or about today's lecture, anything at all? That went by fast. We're already at 1:52. That flew by. And class is done at 2:20. So why don't you just take 20 minutes, work on it as a team, come up with some points to address 2 or 3. You can just make your own teams here. It's no big deal. Just maybe gather with the people that you're sitting next to. And then write it down so that next class, I would also ask that you select one spokesperson for each team, and that person will sort of tell the class what you've come up with. Okay? So work together, and don't worry, we'll have plenty of class exercises, so I will alternate who you choose as a spokesperson. That will change, okay? So everyone should have an opportunity at some point to speak. So I'll let you do that. Take about 20 minutes, and then you're free to go, and I'll see you on Thursday. We'll talk about stage 2. We'll take this up, and then talk about stage 2, create instruction. Okay? Thank you. Yes. Oh, I would stick to maybe 4, no more than 5 members per group. Okay? 4 or 5 members, just find 4 or 5 of you next to each other, and then you can discuss. Okay? You need